Yeah, it is unfortunate, democratic dictatorship of the people. It's just an unfortunate choice of words for Westerners because it contains this upsetting cognitive dissonance, and it really bothers people. It's actually from Karl Marx, but in a nutshell, it's Mao's bottom-up mass line policy making, where they listen to the people, and then the majority rules. Once the majority decides, it's Lenin's democratic centralism. And Lenin's democratic centralism is everybody, top to bottom, including the minority who didn't get their wish this time, needs to back the plan for the collective good. So you just lump it and support the decision of the majority. In the meantime, the decision is constantly assessed and reassessed and adjusted for maximum benefit with Mao's, mass line, these polls and surveys to check the zeitgeist. And again, this has ancient roots, which I've already explained. Now that's at the at the general level. If someone has a grievance that has not been, for them, satisfactorily decided, they should first go to the local government and make a written report of what's going on. There's sewage, whatever coming out in our garden or whatever. It can be anything. Someone who was illegally, who they thought was unjustly arrested, or it could be just one of 1,000 different things. And if they're still unhappy, they can keep taking it up to the county. And then if the county does not offer satisfactory advice, council, they can go to the province, the provincial capital, and even the national legislative and executive levels with the CPP, CC, the executive, and then also the National People's Congress. Every time the NPC meets, and every time the CPPCC meets in Beijing, there's always a bunch of people who feel like they have really been badly treated and are looking for relief. And then for groups who feel wrong, this is something that just blows Westerners away. China has 300 to 500 public protests a day all over the country. It might be 2 people, it might be 200, it can even be up to a couple thousand. If it's a really like a factory, polluting and destroying a river or whatever. These protests can get very big. Of course, Baba Beijing wants to keep it local, but they don't want it to spread and destabilize the society and upset the economy. But Baba Beijing actually likes these protests because it exposes bad governance, malfeasance, corruption. And I've seen protests on a number of occasions myself. I've seen them. Hi, they're out there. They protest, and they don't get maced and get put in cyclone fence cages like in the United States and all around the West. They don't get water cannoned and beaten up, and it's all very, very respectful. And that's why I think China's is the most people-driven democracy in the world. I think it's the most consensual. I'll give you a good example. GMO. Look at GMO in the United States. I don't know what it is in Canada, but in the United States, they couldn't even put GMO on the labels of food because the big, all the big food, the food lobby came in and crushed every state-backed bill to try to put GMO. What percent of the ingredients are GMO? This is just one of hundreds of examples. They, with the mass line, they went out national deal, polls everywhere. Do you want GMO? Over a third of the people came back and said no. Guess what? China doesn't have GMO because enough people were against it. That's what I mean by it being most representative to the citizens' wishes. Upset about face recognition, here comes the legislation, because the people are worried about it. So, and I don't, to be honest with you, it's not just China, but other socialist peoples. It's a very similar system. Cuba, DPRK, Vietnam, Eritrea, and when they're not being destroyed by the West, poor Venezuela, Bolivia, and Argentina, and others, where this local decision making, this bottom up, the committee said is practiced in all these countries. And this is just very, very common in socialist countries. So, and this idea of local justice, solving problems locally, and solving problems at the street level, at the neighborhood level. And so I've had this experience, and of course, as you know, I did a couple. I've had many more, but I wrote one where I was the bad guy because I broke a guy's motorbike. I broke his little plastic thing, in the back when I was riding my bike. I knocked into it. So I wrote about that, and you all like the Steve McQueen hit and run, and to explain local justice. And so, again, this is not the only experience. This is something that has happened to me on numerous occasions over the years. My wife and I rented a car, and we were driving up into the mountains outside of Beijing on a narrow 2-lane road. I could see in the rearview mirror this van was driving like a maniac. I mean, he was like really dangerous. And so he passed several cars at once, and he sideswiped our car and tore all the stuff off of the side of the car, scratched it up really badly. I was enraged. And because here I was, I've been working to develop a good working relationship with this rental car company. And I said, I'll be damned if I'm going to take this car back to these people and tell them that I, was in a car crash or whatever. So instinctively, I thought the guy was going to slow down, but he just kept going. And so I immediately started chasing the guy. My poor wife, she was in white knuckled fear. And I mean, because I was like, now I was driving as bad as this guy, but I just wanted his license plate. And so it took me 15 to 20 minutes, and my poor wife was, literally, just absolutely almost in a state of seizure. But I said, get a notebook, get a pen, get ready. And I was trying to kiss. And so it took us a couple of times to get behind and make sure we got the right license plate number. Then after that, he took off. He was gone. But then, we were really out in the middle of nowhere, and it took us a long time to even find a police station that was open. I mean, not a lot of crime in rural China. And so anyway, we ended up going to Huizhou, and which is outside of Beijing, and we made this report. And they got the license plate number. This was in the morning. We had left early in the morning. And this was about noontime, something like that. And we thought, well, it's useless. Nothing's going to happen. And so we started driving back to Beijing. And about 4 o'clock, I get a phone call from the police. We got your guy. Come on into the Huizhou police station. We were like, what? So we turned around, went back to Huizhou, because we had already started going back to Beijing. And we pulled up, and the captain was just like, smile, just grinning like a Cheshire cat. he was so happy. He said, "Well, there they are." And he showed us the van, and he said, "Is this the van?" I said, "Yeah, that's the license plate, etc." I took pictures of the. He said, "Take pictures of the car. Take pictures of your car, before we go inside." So we all go inside, and the captain said, "Well, there were three of them. There was an older guy who maybe have been the driver, and he forced the kid and his girlfriend to take the heat." But anyway, here we are. All of a sudden, the captain goes, "Okay, go in this room." And so the three culprits and my wife and I are sitting there, and the captain says, "What do y'all figure out what you want to do?" And he just closes the door. We're sitting there like, and so, I mean, can you imagine this in the United States or Canada? I don't know about Canada, but and so these three people were trying to butter us up by offering to order takeaway and all this other stuff. We said no, 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 and so, and this is very Chinese. They said, "Well, how much do you want to make this right?" I had no idea, and so I got the idea to send the photos of the car damage. I originally started out like 3,000 RMB, which would have been about 500 US, because car repair, body shop repair in the States is really, really expensive. And also, I kind of feigned just to make sure that it, I kind of feigned like I had a twinge in my back and I needed to go see the doctor, because that way, since there's personal injury, then they would take it a lot more seriously. So anyway, I sent the photos by WeChat to the car company, and I couldn't believe it. They came back with like 900 renminbi, about 150 bucks.
And also, you wanted to take the car to the dealer directly to have it assessed, and the cop was like, "No, no, no, we settled right here, right now."
We're going to do it right now. Yeah, find out how much do you want. So anyway, he said not, and so then I said, "Well, if I go to the doctor and get an X-ray and all that, I think I maybe added." Anyway, it ended up being like 1,200 renminbi, about 200 bucks. And so then, then they go, "Oh, okay, 1,200 renminbi. We don't have that." So they had to sheepishly call their parents, who put money into their account. The cops kept his ID, national ID. He went to the ATM across the street, got the 1,200 renminbi, and paid us. And then we signed this deal. This has now been resolved. No lawyers, no judges. This is local justice in China. Yeah. The cop was just like, he was elated because he had done his good deed of the day. So they gave us the money, and we drove back. What was really interesting is that those three guys, the older guy and then the young couple, that car was impounded for 6 months. So that car for that family was gone for 6 months, and the kid who was driving lost his license for a year, and that was all decided right there. Mm-hmm. So wow. That car went into impound for 6 months. Mm-hmm. Wow. And so what was really amazing, it was, by this time, it was about 9 o'clock at night. So we're getting in our car driving off, and these poor saps are walking to the bus station. And they're a long way from home. Huizhou is not close, and so they probably got home at 2 or 3 in the morning. So anyway, but this kind of stuff goes on all the time. I mean, you just see. I would be riding my bike around town, and you could just see these clots of people. Something happened. Someone ran into somebody. Somebody hurt somebody. It even happened in our parking lot where we were involved in, where somebody scratched my friend's car, and we had, it was just, you couldn't believe it. It was like 20 people watching what's going on, but it's decided right there. So after my Steve McQueen chase, that's how it ended up. I got back. I handed the car company 900 euros. They were so happy, and because they didn't have to make an insurance claim, and then I got whatever it was 300 RMB and never went to the doctor. And I thought, well, you know what? That kind of just makes up for a crappy day what those people caused us. So anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a real execution of justice in a very visceral way. That's part of just the culture. And like you said, the idea of just these little citizen juries forming whenever a dispute happens, and there's a real urgency to settle and execute some principle of justice on the spot, as just a regular way of life, right? It's not formalized or anything, but you can't imagine something like that really happening in the West. So it's a fun experiment to think about.
Yeah, call my lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. So yeah, the next question, I think we're going to veer towards the end of this really amazing interview. I've got a question. I'm sure Cynthia has a last question as well, to sort of bring us up to date in the current geopolitical environment that we're living in right now. And you said something in your book which is just so important, and you make a point that, we're often told, yeah, China is actually crypto capitalist. They became capitalist in the 1970s when Henry Kissinger went over with Nixon and completely opened up to free markets. And so, there's a lot of just confusion, but you make the point that Deng Xiaoping actually had a much broader vision and was able to flank a lot of the more shallow-minded geopoliticians who had different agendas for China in ways that nobody expected. And we're only starting to really see the fruits of a lot of that in more recent years. Could you go through, on the one hand, a little bit of what that was about, and also if you could say something about the difference between how the wealthy entrepreneurs in China, because there are a lot of them, differ in their relationship to power, to government, versus in China versus the wealthy entrepreneurs and the aristocratic class in the West, and how they relate to the political system?
Yeah, it's a great question. Part of this has to do with the fact that the West does not want to give Mao any credit, and so really nothing. China was a disaster until Deng came along, which is total bollocks. But anyway, it is interesting to note that Deng Xiaoping orchestrated what I call the greatest head fake in post-war history. I mean, it's just unbelievable. By giving the West the illusion that China was going to become global capitalism's next continent-sized Indonesia. But the only way that could work is it took Euranglo Land's hubris of its racist paradigm of superiority. Of course, the Chinese want to be like us, just like everybody else. The West hung themselves on their own, petard of just arrogance and racism. And yes, we live 1990 to 1997. We were there right after Tiananmen. Deng put China into neoliberal shock capitalism at the street level. And this is where people get everything wrong, which was very risky. But again, Chinese leadership trusts the people, and the people trust the government. And it caused a lot of pain. I mean, it caused a lot of pain. It caused a lot of social and economic unrest and criminality. When we were there, it was not a safe place. I mean, we were kind of exonerated as foreigners. But for the Chinese, that's why they back in the 80s they restored the death penalty and executed tens of thousands of people, because it had just literally run amok with just this street level capitalism, hustlers, grifters. I thought, what was it I put in the book? I can't remember. Johnny. Anyway, it was wild, and And this is what culminated in the people's protests in Tiananmen in 1989. And they were sick of these policies, the corruption and the pricing and the inflation and everything else that was going on. This was the root of Tiananmen. But again, this gets back to, China's ancient and communist people's democracy. The people got fed up. They had these huge protests, and the government pulled back. They calmed things down, but to keep the economy going. We lived through from 1990 to 1997. We lived through what I call Deng's, wild East buckaroo days. I mean, it was totally insane at the street and business level. And as I pointed out, it was like a Nat King Cole, five pack a day, nicotine habit. You knew it was bad for you. You knew this was not healthy, but you just couldn't get enough of it, And I was in business. I mean, I was a businessman back then. But here's the deal. So this is what everybody saw, and they projected that on the entire Chinese economy. But from day one, Deng's government, continued to fully support and maintain Mao's main economic foundations, and that is finance, insurance, and real estate remained completely in the hands. You can't buy dirt in China. You can only lease it for 70 years today. The banks are all owned by the government, the people. The insurance companies are all state-owned. And that's true today. Plus, they maintained state ownership of 100 core industries, everything from avionics to zinc mining or whatever, that remained as state-owned enterprises. And all the productive infrastructure remained and still remains people-owned. Ports, highways, high-speed trains, airports, roads, metros, just everything is still state-owned. And I like to say more like people-owned. And another thing that people don't realize is that Deng didn't just pull this stuff out of his head. Mao had already begun to implement collective, people-owned, light industries, and retail and service businesses. That had already started before he died. So Deng simply built on the Mao era's, lengthy lists of accomplishments. And this really upsets a lot of people. They just cannot accept it. And this has not only continued today, but under Xi, it has actually been expanded and consolidated, and has been consolidated. The West heard what they wanted to hear. When Deng wore his 10-gallon hat, in Texas, remember that? The 10-gallon cowboy hat, and put on the big smile, and all that, as well as Thatcher and all the others when he and Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, whispered all these free market Western democracy, sweet nothings in their ears. And China was and still is a communist socialist country, and we could go into but it's fundamentally a communist socialist country with at the consumer level private, but everything else is very, very much under state control, or at least management. And so you wrangle land. I remember when Xi was elected president, they thought all these, Chinese experts, back in the United States and England, and they really did. They thought that finally, here we've got, Xi was going to be their Boris Yeltsin, to serve China to Western imperialism on a platter. And why? Because his father was considered a liberal, and because his father was a well-respected, member of the Communist Party. He was the one who negotiated with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and he was the one that negotiated with the Tibetans. So because he was considered to be kind of like a liberal, they thought, oh, well, like father, like son. Well, yeah, what arrogance. I mean, Xi has shown them otherwise. He's more Mao. He's really, taken, China back to a lot of the Mao fundamentals. As far as the super rich, I can't remember whether it was the Big Red Book on China or China Rise, but I actually put a picture in there of a sheep half shorn.
Yeah, it's in Big Red Book.
Is it? Okay, I can't remember which one it was. And it's like, when is China going to shear the fat sheep, fear the fat sheep? And what happened recently with Jack Ma and Alibaba, is really instructive. Baba Beijing is not going to let the rich and powerful run amok at the expense of the 99%. They're not going to let it happen. Right now, the government is going after a number of big tech companies, Robin Lee's Tencent, which is WeChat, and these are multi-billion dollar behemoths, and they're going after them. And they're reining in their, storing facial recognition. They're reining in their storage of voice recognition. They're reining in, controlling some of the online payments, et cetera. They're reining in their, doing online consumer loans. They are, it's kind of interesting because up until recently, the Chinese were somewhat, my friends would even tell me, yeah, we've got billionaires just like the United States and Europe. There was this kind of sense of pride that, well, we're just as good as the Westerners because, we've got all these billionaires. And as long as everybody was making money and, people, salaries, were doubling every 10 years, and 85% of the Chinese own a house, and something like 2/3 of them are all paid off. As long as the pie was getting bigger for everybody, the Chinese didn't care. But as I pointed out, with Mao's mass line, if they start hearing about discontent and dissatisfaction with the super rich, there's so much money sloshing around in China. It is just unbelievable. And so if they get even a hint that the people are starting to sour on their billionaire class, you can bet your sweet bippy that Baba Beijing will not hesitate to shear that fat sheep, and they will go after them with taxes, regulations, etc. So, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and George Soros and Pierre Omidyar and all these other multi-billionaires, Mark Zuckerberg and all these people who have basically co-opted much of Western governance. I mean, it's little. I mean, they censor a president of the United States, Donald Trump. It's just like unimaginable. And so that's not going to happen in China. I mean, they've co-opted blockchain. They have co-opted Bitcoin money. All that is all being very carefully controlled by Baba Beijing to make sure that they are not used to rip the people off.
Yeah, all factors of potential chaos.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, social media and yeah.
They're so I think, and Jack Ma's a communist. He's a member of the Communist Party of China. He's a bunch of these, almost all the leaders of all the CEOs of all these SEOs. They're all members of the Communist Party. A lot of wealthy people, but the idea that they should like George Soros, destroy the British pound on speculation to make, I don't know what it is, probably billions of dollars in today's dollars, is absolutely repugnant to your average Chinese. And so it's not going to happen. They will, when they feel when they look at that thermometer and it's warming up against the super rich, but they're not going to destroy them. I mean, Jack Ma, I mean, his company Alibaba has basically been kind of like semi-statified. It's become almost like a semi-private, semi-public company. He's still worth $15 billion. It's not like they're sending him to a gulag. I mean, he's still a rich guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
you make the point too in your book that these people are making money also because of the Chinese government setup. So it's a give and take, or
exactly.
Like they're both receiving.
Yeah,
absolutely. Social harmony, economic prosperity for all.
Yeah,
political stability. Infrastructure. Look at China is, building, I think, something like 100 and something airports in the next 5-year plan. I mean, you don't think that helps business?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just like nonstop. So yeah, it is a symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationship between these big companies and the government, and they're taxed, man. I mean, taxes in China are not low. I mean, it is a relatively high tax country. They have a VAT on everything for one. I think it's 5%, and so it's not a low tax. It's not a low tax system. But then you have a city like Shenzhen who has so much freaking money. I mean, it's just oozing out of their ears. That when I opened my school, I opened up an LLC in Shenzhen. They have so much freaking money. I was exonerated from paying taxes for like 2 or 3 years.
Whoa.
So that's again, there's a lot of money sloshing around China, and Baba Beijing is going to make sure that it goes mostly to support the poor people, the middle class, and and the rural areas for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right. And yeah, just to also compare, like in the West, the pharmaceutical companies, for instance, not just big tech, so out of control, and it's ridiculous, like how the people are expected to pay for a lot of these costs, and yet there's no transparency, and ultimately these companies get to charge whatever they want to the healthcare system. And people who don't have the money or the insurance to cover it are denied treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the fact that, with the vaccine laws, you're not even allowed to sue if
Mm-hmm.
you have like certain side effects from some of these treatments. You're not even really given an option to sue. So
exactly.
China is much more, I think, fair in these things. So
Absolutely.
to wrap it up, Jeff, could you explain to some people who might not understand the Belt and Road Initiative? I know that it's, I think, been declared an official threat to security in the United States. Like, they view this as somehow, like, I don't know, some kind of nuclear missile system. But if you could explain what the BRI is, what China is doing in areas of the Middle East, Africa, what does win-win philosophy mean? And why is this not the same old Western imperialism game of zero-sum geopolitics, 2 scorpions stuck in a bottle together?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
How this system has allowed China undeniably to pretty much eliminate poverty within their own country.
Yeah, it's amazing. The well, you two are really the experts. I mean, you all have done some wonderful reporting on the Belt and Road Initiative, and so I would actually defer to you. But I will give you my spin. You know, in any event, you know, the ancient Chinese Silk roads to Europe, and the lesser known tea and horse routes to Southeast Asia, which I got to see in Yunnan, were win-win commercial and diplomatic endeavors. And again, I will say it until I am red in the face or blue in the face. As we have seen, China does not have any of the West's, you know, 6 E's of racism in its sociocultural and geopolitical DNA. I mean, if they could have used the Silk Roads and the tea and horse routes to take over Southeast Asia and Asia if they wanted to. But what's really, and of course, this was Xi's vision, Xi Jinping's vision, which he launched in 2013, and I wrote about it, you know, when he went to the to the museum in Beijing. It's all very a lot of symbolism and against imperialism. But anyway, the Belt and Road Initiative is simply repeating Zheng He's maritime routes and all of these routes to Europe and all of the routes down to Southeast Asia. And it's really, I love it. I mean, I just think it's just, I love it. And because the BRI is proving, you know, the Halford Mackinder's, you know, this heartland of Asia theory, that if you control that axis across the east-west axis across Asia, that you can pretty much control this part of the world. The BRI is proving this to be correct, and I'm sure Zbigniew Brzezinski is probably turning in his grave. I mean, this is like the worst nightmare, because now the BRI, I mean, just not only the commercial aspect and the technological aspect and everything else, but we now have the DPRK, Russia, China, and Iran, like this, in what I call the Asian Quad. I mean, they have got Asia locked up, and the BRI is in the middle of it, and there is absolutely nothing that the West can do about it. And so the BRI, I mean, it's just unbelievable. You know, it's flourishing from Portugal, where I just spent a month, and Portsmouth in England to Penang in Malaysia, and the Persian Gulf, you know, off the coast of Iran. It's all the way to Senegal and Africa, Chile and South America. It's everywhere except the US, which is rejected. I mean, there's thousands of trains, you know, going between Europe, you know, Germany, England, Portugal, Spain. It's just thousands of them, you know, going, you know, crisscrossing the Asian landmass. So this is the ultimate nightmare, you know, for the West. You know, these reptile-brained, neoliberal, neo-colonialists. They are being totally outflanked and passed by with no constructive answer to counter the BRI. And instead of saying, why don't we join? They would never do that, because that's not the way these psychopaths, you know, think.
And they wouldn't be able to dictate.
Yeah, exactly.
They'd have to work with others on an equal platform.
Yeah. Imperialists don't do that. Imperialists tell you what to do and how to do it. So as far as China's elimination of extreme poverty, which they bravely announced in 2020, again, there can be no real understanding of China today if you do not understand the Mao era, and because China would not be here today without the Mao era. And so China's poverty reduction started in 1949, with the communist socialist liberation. You saw in the book. I mean, I just list, all this stuff all these successes during the Mao era. Just one factoid, life expectancy was 35 years. 35 years. Can you even, with all the opium and everything? And in 1949, it was 76, more than doubled by 1978, which is considered, even though Mao died in 76, the policies continued until 78, and they really didn't, and Deng really wasn't able to get going really effectively until 1980. But we can officially say that the Mao era was 1978 because Deng did start working after that. It's just the achievements during the Mao era are just the statistics and the accomplishments, the socioeconomic accomplishments. Deng could have not gotten out of his chair without Mao's many successes, and it continued under Deng, Jiang, Hu, and now Xi. Now China finally, in the last 10 years, China has created so much internal wealth that they finally had the money to just literally go out and spend, I think it was $100 and something billion to eliminate poverty and extreme poverty. And my wife and I saw it. We were in Yunnan, and I did see some poor villages when I was traveling for my book 44 Days. I mean, there was obviously some poverty. We were like on a dirt road winding along the border with Laos, and we saw two or three of these villages. And when she announced 2 or 3 years ago that they were going to eliminate extreme poverty, I immediately said, those 3 villages are at the top of the list. Those were the kind of backwater, up valleys, hanging on mountainsides. That's what they went after. And again, this really upsets a lot of people. But in my opinion, China's secret sauce for poverty elimination is very simple. It's just communism, socialism. And it's not just China. I mean, when you look at every other similar country, like, what communist socialist Vietnam, DPRK, Bolivia, Argentina, Ecuador, Venezuela, Cuba, Eritrea, in spite of having open war waged on them, open war waged on them by the West 24/7, they were and are able to eliminate poverty. And so I know this isn't very popular to say, but for me, the long and the short of it is, capitalism cannot survive cannot survive without poverty, and socialism cannot survive with poverty. And they're just going to keep moving. Now they've eliminated extreme poverty. Now they're going to go to phase 2 and eliminate poverty at a higher level, so that by 2035 China will be a moderately prosperous country for all of the citizens, basically middle class. And this goes back to Confucius, the Xiaokang, the idea of middle class prosperity goes back 3,000 years. That idea, they're going to eventually, get everybody, especially in the rural areas, they're going to get even more people, more prosperous, because they use their money to help the people and not, pay dividends to Wall Street, not pay interest to the City of London. They print their own money. They control their own destiny. And it's just psychological, deflection. Oh, China's corrupt. I would say China is probably one of the least corrupt countries in the world in terms of their governance. I mean, it's there's corruption everywhere. You want real corruption? Just go to London and Washington and Paris. You know,
Yeah.
London has a history of important people going missing or dying when they pass through. So, and it's, I think, still the largest terrorist hub.
Yeah,
where terrorists go to retire.
You said
But I
London?
think another important point to what you were saying is that China doesn't regard the population, which is constantly growing in China, as a burden. Whereas in the Western capitalist system, as you see with the policies that are increasingly speeding up, coming into place, because they're going bankrupt, their economies are tanking, and they're taking it out on the people. And now, like, the elderly are becoming a burden, the sick are becoming a burden, and they don't regard the individual as something useful. Whereas in China, the individual is considered something useful. Or even like in the situation of the Middle East, for the most part, or in Africa, they have a lot of people and a lot of youth, and they regard this as a resource. China regards this as a resource. India, too, is in a similar situation where they have a lot of young people. The turnaround that is possible for these countries when you have that kind of a population is amazing. But China, the way they treat the elderly is completely different from like what I've seen in the West. It's become really immoral with how families kind of isolate themselves from the elderly at this point. They're put in a home or whatever, and they're rarely visited. And the way the hospital also treats these types of people. So that's another thing for people to keep in mind, is that China really does take the welfare of all very seriously. And the medical care system in China is better than the West. It's like by far better.
China now has universal health care for 1.4 billion people. That's an amazing accomplishment, and that started in 2011 when Hu Jintao announced, that we are no longer going to have, in so many words, we are no longer going to have a medical system like the United States, which is what they had done. It had become very privatized. A lot of people died. So they said, we are now rich enough, and we can afford to take care of all of our people. Yeah. And so the U.S. doesn't have universal health care. Europe is destroying what they have. I don't know about, I think I keep hearing Canada, the National Health Service in England is being completely debauched. I keep hearing from people in Canada that they're cutting back. So yeah, you're right. I always like to joke that if you marry a Chinese person and you all have children, guess who's going to come live with you? Grandma and grandpa. You're going to be a 3-generation household. So that's just the way. I mean, everything revolves around the elderly, and of course this goes back to Confucius, Taoism, and so it took me a long time to get over my biases and prejudices and Western racism, but I truly believe that Chinese civilization is superior in almost every aspect, socioeconomic, geopolitical. I honestly believe that it is superior to Western civilization, and which is why I hope it can become a model for other countries and peoples to emulate into the 21st century.
Like on our Rising Tide Foundation website, we try really hard to get across that when you look at what gave vitality, moral fitness to survive to the best developments of the West, it's really tapping into the same principle, and that's why we call it the rising tide lifts all boats. The same principle we find animating China right now, where we have, you know, quotes by John F. Kennedy popularized the term "a rising tide lifts all boats" because his idea of what the relationship of economics, politics, and justice should be were integrated. And the idea that, you know, if you have value introduced somewhere, it shouldn't come at the expense as a zero-sum game of value being taken elsewhere, which is why a lot of these projects like Great Water Projects throughout the 1960s under his lead, or other infrastructure projects which were multi-generational, were defined around an idea that private interest could be in alignment with the general welfare. So the whole and the parts could cohere in harmony, and not be in this antagonism, which you tend to get with a lot of the monetary worshippers or geopoliticians who want to sort of stick our paradigm into a zero-sum box of fighting for diminishing returns, which is why I love just the BRI concept right now.
Yeah.
It's all of these geopoliticians get so frustrated because they're trying to define it as a thing that they could subvert, but it's so fluid and so creative. And like you said, it's principles of it are popping up across Africa. 17 nations in the Latin American Caribbean zone have signed on to the BRI framework. Middle East, you know, and it's so open for adaptation to the local conditions, which is why they also get attacked. China gets attacked so vociferously by the technocrats of the West, saying, oh, they're supporting corruption because they're not demanding or imposing their system onto the corrupt small country that they're building infrastructure in. They're just building infrastructure, not demanding that they do good governance first. That's so bad of China. And it's like, no, China has higher priorities that go far beyond projecting their own system onto their neighbors. And it deals with more tapping into the idea that we all need water, we all need food, we all need an education, and we all need hope for the future. And if we think that way, when we look at our demographic baby boomer, you know, lopsidedness, which China is also facing just like we are. However, we don't have to kill off baby boomers to meet the diminishing returns or scarcity the way we see with a lot of the medical reforms of the Five Eyes and the Euranglo land zone, which is just trying to adapt to scarcity. Whereas China's saying, no, if we don't have enough currently to supply the oncoming wave of people who are going to have increased needs of medical expenses as they get older, let's create abundance. Let's go for creation, not adaptation to scarcity.
A bigger pie.
Exactly. Let's make the pie bigger. Why are we fighting over these crumbs?
Yeah, exactly.
Very different paradigm, and it's a real breath of fresh air to think that human beings can do this, you know. So yeah,
Go China.
Go China. Absolutely. Thank God. I'd be a much more depressed person. I think Cynthia agrees. And if they weren't doing what they were doing with Russia and their allies. So
Absolutely.
Jeff, my God, we've gone a little over 2 hours, and
yeah,
this.
I know. I've never done an interview this long. Although I did. Well, as a guest, I had Einar Schlereth on in his amazing autobiography for World War II and all that. But anyway, that was a 2.5 hour. But I was the host doing, and he did most of the talking. But yeah, this is the longest one where I have been in the hot seat. So thank you for putting up with me.
My God, thank you, Jeff, for taking the time. Yeah, it's been the pleasure all ours, and I really hope that people take the time instead of watching a movie tonight. Watch this 2 hour podcast. It really learns something really useful for your life and for the future. This is just such a rich, dense education that you've just taken years of your own experience and you've condensed it into that wonderful book, all of your books really, which people should go online and purchase, invest, and take the time and share the discoveries. Jeff, why don't you say something for the audience in terms of how they can, again, reach you, get in touch with you, go to your website. So.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you very much. I humbly appreciate your kind words, because you all are a couple of very, very high-powered journalists, researchers, and writers. My website is www.chinarising.punto, Punto, press, press.com. And I have an author's page on Amazon. I do not like Amazon, but for authors, they do offer a nice platform. Just Google or just search on Amazon, Jeff J. Brown in 44 days, or Jeff J. Brown, China Rising, or Jeff J. Brown, Big Red Book on China, and then you can click on on my author page. And so I do, again, I do a lot of blogging, podcasting, interviews. I've got several lined up for the rest of the month of April. So we're all in it together. We're all trying to make the world a better place, and having young people like the two of you really getting out and trying to save global capitalism from itself is really encouraging, and so thank you for everything that you all do too.
Thanks.